Okay. So at this point, in order to show off Razor, I want to just delete all of it, start fresh. And let's do the for loop again. For almost did for because I'm so used to doing JavaScript lately. So for var jugador in model. Okay, so we make sure that works. So I showed you this before. We see all those transitions I was talking about. But let's start digging deeper into it. Let's test this out. So what if I said, hola, me llamo, or se llamo, right? Se llama, and I hit a dot there. You notice there I'm getting IntelliSense, right? Because right now at this point, the Visual Studio parser doesn't know, am I going to call a method of this expression, or am I putting a literal dot? So I'm going to go ahead and save that and not type anything more. And we can see that it worked just fine. So the Razor parser is smart enough to look at the very next character, and it says, well, is this a literal, or is this markup? And then it figures out like that, oh, that dot is actually meant to be literal text. It's not like you're trying to call another method or property. But let's say I went ABC. Like I just wanted to put an ABC suffix. So I'm not trying to call it .abc. What I really want is I want it to show ABC. Well, if I do it just like this is not going to work. We're going to get a really nasty error message, right? And the problem is that at this point, we're trying to create an expression, a code expression. And Razor thinks I'm saying, jugador.nombre.abc. So in any case like this where there's ambiguity, where we confuse the parser, we can use parentheses to be explicit. So if I put parentheses around that, you notice that the parentheses light up. And that lets us know that the ABC is meant to be literal text. So there are a few edge cases you will run into where you're going to need to use the parentheses, but most of the time you almost don't even need to know about it. I'll give you another example. Someone in a talk I gave recently asked, well, what about email addresses? They use the @ sign. Are you going to try to call a method, right? So if I say philha@microsoft.com, did I mean to say philha and then call the Microsoft object and call the com method on that? Well, you'll notice there it didn't light up. And likewise, we recognize email addresses. The algorithm we employ is a very simple one because we didn't want to run a full email regex. If it looks kind of like an email address, we're not going to render it out. So I think even if I went like this, oh no, so that actually, now it thinks it's Razor. Okay, let's go back. So here's a question. What if I actually did have a Microsoft.com object? So, for example, let's clean this up. And let's say it's Mr. Jugador.nombre. So at this point, it thinks all of that is an email address. It doesn't know better. But once again, we can use the parentheses to be explicit about that. And now it works. Just to show you that we thought through a lot of different cases, when I give a Razor demo, I always like to show this case because not many people realize a couple things about C#. One is that there are certain reserved keywords in C#, right? Such as class. You can't have a property named class. And if I try, and I compile, it says, well, I was expecting an identifier. But you can use the @ sign to specify a class. So now this will compile. So let's go back to home controller, and let's actually put something in the @ class. And now let's go to the view. And how are we going to print out @jugador.atClass? You can see by the way it's highlighting, it's gotten a little confused, right? So let's run that and see what happens. So it doesn't know what to do, but can anyone guess how we can fix this? Right. Once again, parentheses. So if we use parentheses, we can make it very explicit that this is an explicit expression, and now it works. The other thing to note about Razor is, what if I did this instead? And now I run, oh, got to compile. And now if I run this, you can see there that we HTML encode by default. So we want to go safety first. So then the natural question is, well, what if I really want you to show that script? And so what you can do there is, we support the iHTML string interface. So if you're not familiar with iHTML string, let me just write it out here. This is a new interface introduced in ASP.NET 4. And what it is it's a way for you to tell us that you really want this to be HTML, that you're going to vouch for this. You know it's safe, and you want it to be rendered as HTML. And anything that's returned as iHTML string, we'll render it as HTML, and we will not encode it, because we trust you. So in this case, we have a method called html.raw, and now I can pass Jugador.addClass in there. And when I refresh this page, it renders it out as script now. So this is your get out of jail card for the encoding. OK, so let's talk about layouts really quickly. I showed you real briefly. I'm going to create a brand new layout instead of using the default one. Layout equals views/shared/lay_layout 2.cshtml. So what I'm doing here is this page is saying that guy, layout 2, is the layout for this page. Oop, we need to unhack that, huh? Okay. So now we're using that layout. But what's interesting is you notice here that I had to specify the layout, whereas before, when I didn't specify the layout, it used another layout, right? It used the default layout. So how does that work? Well, one of the little tricks we have is in the root of the views directory, there's this little file called _viewStart. And notice that over here is where we have the layout. And so this _viewStart code, you can put code in here that applies to all of your views in any subdirectory of the views folder. And this code will run first before your view runs. So it runs after the controller runs, but before the view runs. So right now, there's not a whole lot of benefit other than setting the layout that I can think of to show you. But if you had like common bits of view code that you wanted to define, you could put it in this file, and it will run before all the other ones. So by default, if you're using our default layout or _layout, you don't even need to specify the layout within your view. So let's stick with the default one because it looks better. And you notice here that the footer is blank. And wouldn't it be nice to have something that shows up in the footer? So what I can do here is call render section, and we'll give it a name, footer. Just like that. Now, when I run my view, it's saying, well, there's no footer defined, so I'm going to complain about it. And so that's not what we probably want when we add a new section. We don't want every single view in our site to break. So you have the option of saying, oh, we're going to set the required to false. And by doing that, you don't need to specify the footer now. But we have the option to. So I will go to index, and we'll just use the @section syntax, and we just give it the name, footer. And then, let's see if I remember how to do this. And now in here, we can just use HTML markup. So div, this is the footer. And in fact, we have access to model dot, count footer for players.